Before I get started, I would like to dedicate this video to the Disneyland Annual Pass program, which got canceled this year. Even though Disney axed you the way Mickey axed that broom in this movie, may you come back bigger, better, and more unstoppable than before. Now, with all that being said, hey everyone, it's Alexander, the real Mr. Robinson. Welcome to the channel. This is my review for Fantasia, which is the third animated film from Walt Disney. Came out in 1940, the same year as Pinocchio, and doesn't really have a plot. I can't really give a plot summary for this movie because it's basically a bunch of shorts animated to classical music, and they were all just lumped together in a feature film. The best way I can describe this movie is that you're going to a classical music concert at, say, the Hollywood Bowl. You fall asleep, and all the images depicted in this movie is what you see when you hear this classical music play. So for Disney's third movie, this is a very weird decision for them to make because you had two movies based off pre-existing source material, and then with this movie, you go full experimental and make a movie that kids can watch, but really isn't designed for kids. I mean, to be honest, Fantasia is one of the VHS tapes that I owned when I was much younger, but out of all the Disney movies that I owned, Fantasia was the one that I would put on the least because it just didn't really appeal to me. Fantasia was always one of the Disney movies that never really crossed my mind in terms of favorite Disney movies. Again, when I was a kid. I remember watching a little bit of the movie in elementary school, and aside from the Sorcerer's Apprentice, the only thing that really stuck out to me was the Rite of Spring segment with all the dinosaurs. It wasn't until I turned 20 years old that I actually decided to sit down and watch it from beginning to end. And for being one of the Disney movies that I watched the least and didn't care for at all as a kid, as an adult, it suddenly transformed into not only one of my favorite Disney movies, but my favorite from Disney's golden age. I think the main reason is because this movie proves, more than anything, that animation is a work of art. When I was watching the Blu-ray bonus features for Snow White, there's a segment where we see Walt Disney signing a contract with RKO. And when one of the heads of RKO is asking Walt Disney what he's going to do next, and Disney says, "We're going to make a feature-length cartoon," I always got bothered by the fact that Disney referred to Snow White as a feature-length cartoon, because I feel like with animated movies, there's more to them than just being cartoons. When I hear the word cartoon, I think of something that's on TV, plays for 30 minutes, and is really more fun than actually has artistic quality in terms of the animation. With animated films, I feel like because there's a lot of resources that go into them, they can expand beyond just being a cartoon, and Fantasia is definitely the prime example of that. The animation in this movie is absolutely gorgeous. Once again, Disney keeps pushing the envelope on what they can do with animation. Every segment of this movie is just beautiful to watch. And half of the segments really are just nothing happening. They're just a series of events that just take place set to various pieces of classical music. The only segment that actually has something of a plot, beginning, a middle, and an end, is the Sorcerer's Apprentice, and that's actually how Fantasia came to be. The whole idea started with a meeting between Walt Disney and Leopold Stokowski, and both of them were actually fans of each other. Disney wanted to do an animated version of the Sorcerer's Apprentice because at this point in 1940, Mickey Mouse was actually on the decline, and Disney thought that the Sorcerer's Apprentice would be the perfect thing to boost Mickey Mouse's stardom. So he asked Leopold Stokowski to score it, and it was actually going to be another Silly Symphonies short, but the further they got along with doing this short, the more they realized that the production costs were too high. The budget of The Sorcerer's Apprentice was actually 3 to 4 times that of a usual Silly Symphonies cartoon. And according to Brian Sibley on the DVD commentary for this movie, the budget was clocked in around $160,000, which if you were to adjust that for inflation, that would be the equivalent of almost $3 million in today's money. And eventually it was decided that if this short had stood on its own and just became a Silly Symphonies cartoon, then it would not be able to make up for what it actually cost. So because of that, the idea came around to just do other animated segments set to classical music and just weave it into a feature film, which we have here as Fantasia. And the Sorcerer's Apprentice is the most iconic segment of Fantasia. It's the one that really kicked off Mickey Mouse into being the icon that he is. It gave us one of the most defining looks for Mickey Mouse. It's the version of Mickey Mouse that you see when you go to any of the Disney theme parks. And it's just such a perfect piece. And while that might be the most famous segment of the movie, it's not my personal favorite. My personal favorite has to be Rite of Spring, because outside of the fact that there are dinosaurs in the movie, I feel like when I listen to the music, you can kind of hear hints of the Jaws theme. And I get the feeling that John Williams might have been inspired by Igor Stravinsky when it comes to his style of music. And of course, all the dinosaur sequences in Rite of Spring are just cool because dinosaurs are awesome. And when it comes to that big final battle between the T-Rex and the Stegosaurus, it's once again animated by Wolfgang Reitherman, who did the Monstro Chase in Pinocchio. And the entire Rite of Spring segment with the dinosaurs would be the inspiration for Primeval World, which you can see at the Disneyland Railroad. In fact, this shot right here of the T-Rex fighting the Stegosaurus is beat for beat the same pose that the animatronic T-Rex and Stegosaurus are at in Disneyland. My next favorite segment would have to be the Nutcracker Suite, probably because the Nutcracker music is just so iconic. And then there's Night on Bald Mountain mixed with Ave Maria, which is both horrifying, metal, but also beautiful at the same time. The other segments are good as well, the Dance of the Hours, Pastoral Suite, and the opening of the movie, but they just don't hit me the same way as the other segments do. The opening sequence of the movie, or Toccata and Fugue, is just a bunch of animated images that really don't tell anything close to a story. They're just images, or as Deems Taylor puts it at the beginning of the movie, music that exists for its own sake. And again, there's nothing wrong with this opening sequence, but it just doesn't really do a whole lot for me. And then the Pastoral Suite has some beautiful shots to it, like when Zeus opens up the clouds and you see the silhouettes of all the centaurs and centaurettes running away. That's a gorgeous shot. There are so many beautiful shots and pieces of animation in that entire suite, but the only thing that kind of hurts it is actually something that no longer exists in Fantasia. Like I've said before, Fantasia as a kid was a movie that I watched the least. When I bought it on DVD when I hit 20, it automatically turned into one of my favorite animated movies from Disney. But I was unaware of a certain character that used to be in Fantasia up until I actually took a college course on race and media. And the character in question is Sunflower, who is pretty much this servant to the other female centaurettes. And the way she's depicted is, as Corey Coleman of Double Toasted would put it, a cross between a donkey and a pickaninny. The full animated sequences involving Sunflower do exist, and you can find them on YouTube. And when I saw Sunflower for the first time, I was just like, oh my god, that is racist and unacceptable. Like, people talk about the crows from Dumbo, which we'll get to next week because I do have some stuff to say about those crows. But Sunflower is probably the most racist thing that Disney's created within their animated catalog. I know Song in the South exists, but that's a live action movie. I'm talking about specifically their animated catalog. I'm glad that Sunflower is cut out of the movie because that's an image that nobody needs to be exposed to. But at the same time, I'm also glad that that footage is still available for people to see, because I think it's important for people to understand that, look, this character was a product of its time. It was racist back then, and it's sure as hell racist today, and nobody would tolerate it. And when you watch Fantasia, you can clearly tell where Sunflower was supposed to be. Whether you see shots that have more film grain than others, whether you see shots being repeated so the movie can stay in sync with the music, or if you really pay attention to one of the centaurettes, you'll notice that there are some flowers on her side that are moving on their own. Sunflower was supposed to be holding a string of flowers to basically accompany that centaurette, and that's why the flowers on the centaurette's side appear to be moving on their own, because they had to cut out Sunflower. And it's really ironic that the middle half of the Pastoral Suite would suffer heavily from being censored, and yet the centaurettes first appear as topless. No nipples, but those Centaurettes are full-on topless, and it is weird. But then again, there are topless demons with full-on nipples. And you know what the funniest part of that is? Since Disney Plus made such a big deal about covering Daryl Hannah's ass in Splash with fake CGI hair, they didn't edit that in Fantasia. No, you can still see topless Centaurettes and topless demons in the Disney Plus version of Fantasia. So if we could just reel things back into Fantasia and just the overall movie, despite my problems with it, I think it's an absolute masterpiece. It is one of my favorite movies of all time. It landed at number 70 in my top 100 favorite movies of all time list. I think it's just an absolutely beautiful work of art. It's pretty ambitious for being the studio's third animated film. I love how experimental it can get. There are some sequences that I greatly prefer over others, but there's never a sequence in this movie that I think is bad or dull. It's just some affect me more than others. But those are the only criticisms that I really have about Fantasia. I ultimately say get off your ass and go see this movie right now. But I also have to put a caveat out there. This is not the kind of movie that you can just instantly watch. You really have to be in the right mood to watch Fantasia. You have to go into this expecting it to be like going to a musical concert. Outside of The Sorcerer's Apprentice, there's nothing that resembles a coherent story, but that's not the point of this movie. The point of this movie is to be more of an emotional experience. You're supposed to sit back and just let it wash over you. And if you can accept this movie for that quality, then you are in for something really special and something that I don't think Disney will ever attempt to do. Like, this really is Disney's experimental art house film, and I would be shocked if they try to attempt something like this again. And there you go, that's my review for Fantasia, which, like Pinocchio, didn't do well when it came out. It didn't cost as much as Pinocchio, but because World War II was going on and European and Asian markets were cut off, it couldn't have made a profit. Although I would have wondered if this movie had not been released during World War II and had access to those markets, would it have been a hit? Would audiences been able to have embraced this movie for what it was? Or would it have still been a disappointment considering that it's so experimental and not at all like the studio's first two movies? We'll never know the answer to that. However, I do know that because Pinocchio and Fantasia didn't do well at the box office, Disney's next movie would be made just to recoup the losses from both those movies. And that movie is Dumbo, which is definitely a return to more of a traditional Disney animated movie, and we'll talk about that next week. But first, I want to know what you guys think about Fantasia. If you've seen it, what did you think? What's your favorite of the segments featured in Fantasia? Whatever the case may be, let me know in the comments below. And until next time, I hope you enjoyed this review. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, leave a comment, support my Patreon page, follow me on social media, and until then, this is the real Mr. Robinson telling you there is only one.